is Joe Van Kerkhove. I'm an associate professor of art at Tiffin University, and EVAC project was a project that was started by me and a colleague of mine at Tiffin University, where we started off looking at our student veteran population and how they're being isolated within the classrooms, and we wanted to try to figure out a way that we could bring them back, not only introduce them back into the classroom, but have it to where the other students that are surrounding them understand more about their experience. So what we did is we had a discussion, and we started talking about interviewing veterans and then having students create artworks based off of those experiences. And we started interviewing veterans, and as we started interviewing veterans, we realized that the stories that they were sharing with us were much more important and much more in-depth than we thought we would get. And we kind of thought that it would be best to actually approach professional artists as opposed to students in order to get the stories to be handled with more care and also more respect. So the first round that we did had 22 artists, and we ended up having 22 interviews. And I'm a printmaker, so what I ended up doing was kind of connecting with my printmaking community, old professors, colleagues of mine, students that I went to grad school with, and started reaching out to get a collection of artists that were going to interpret these veteran stories. We had them create an edition of 10 images, and of those images, the veteran received one of those images as a thank you, and something that he could then pass on to his family as kind of record of that experience that he had serving in the military. The other images, we actually framed 2 of them to have exhibitions just like this one, and any artworks that were sold, the money was dedicated or distributed to a charity that the veteran identified. So as far as the process, what we do is we actually start with the interview. The entire process could take up to a year. So once we interview the veteran, we take that story, we send it back to the veteran so he can actually read it, proof it, remove anything that he doesn't feel comfortable with sharing. Once we get that back, we transcribe everything, we send it to the artist, and they have anywhere from 4 to 6 months to complete the image. Once they complete the image, we receive it back. We get the ones that we're printing, and then it becomes part of that traveling exhibition. Our first show was in 2017 at Tiffin University. We ended up busing in veterans from the Sandusky Veterans Home, where we had, I believe it was 4 or 5 veterans that we actually interviewed for our first round. And when we saw the interaction between the students and the veterans, we realized that we needed to do more. It wasn't something that was going to be kind of this one-off project. And what we ended up doing was doing another round. We ended up interviewing more veterans. We ended up getting more artists, and then it kind of snowballed from there. So we started off with 22 images to begin. The project now has 69 images, of which kind of travel around the country. I believe we've done 34 exhibitions to date. And the nice thing for the artists is it's not just traditional spaces like art galleries like Parkland has. We've been at Reagan National Airport, we've been in Dulles International Airport, we've been on Army bases exhibiting that show, we've been in the Flatiron Building in downtown New York. So we've kind of traveled around, and it gives these unconventional spaces so we reach more of a population. So we're reaching specifically vets on Army bases, we're reaching specifically kind of arts and art enthusiasts and traditional galleries, but then we also have public spaces that, we're hitting more civilians like airports. So we're kind of reaching out and hitting a lot of the population that we're trying to actually incorporate and engage. So with some of the artworks, what we've realized is that there's a lot of different nuances that happen. With this piece here, Erin, who is a professor at University of Dayton, she teaches printmaking, and Edgardo, who's an Army Vietnam vet, his story was, I believe, about 2.5 hours long. And the section that Erin actually ended up focusing on, if you look at the transcript, it's very, very small, right? So it was only probably about 2 minutes of that 2.5 hour interview. And he had talked about a lot of different things. It was a funny story. He had some serious stuff in there. And the interesting thing is like when she actually ended up getting the story and listening to it, he talked about, one, when he went to the recruiting office and them telling him, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want, you pick what you want to do. And he was kind of suckered into that, right? Because everybody gets told that same story, and he said, I don't want to shoot guns and I don't want to fly in a helicopter. And when he ended up going in, they were like, well, you're going to go and you're going to be a letter writer. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to sit down and you're going to write letters home to families that we found their son, and you're going to write them basically saying that their child has been killed in action. And so he's like, I did that, and that's about all he said about it. Like, he just kind of glazed over it a little bit. And then he moved on to, I ended up, having to take gun training. He's like, wait, I didn't want to shoot guns. And they're like, well, this is what you have to do, And he talked about his captain kind of getting on them about not having anywhere to do work. So he wanted an oaken desk, and they left, and they came back and like, well, we need guns. We need to trade guns, and we'll get you an oaken desk. And they leave, and they come back, and they bring him this oak desk. It's beautiful, and it's like one of those things where you're in the middle of Vietnam, and they bring back this beautiful oaken desk so he has some place to work. So there's stories like that throughout it that kind of, they're kind of odd and kind of unique to the situation. And at the end of the story, he ended up being a gunner on a helicopter. So the two things that he didn't want to do, he ended up doing. Shooting a gun, and he was afraid of heights, and he ended up in a helicopter. So it was kind of entertaining to kind of listen to his story. So when he got the image, at first he was a little bit like, what? He's like, why would she do this? Like, I don't understand. Like, there's so much good stuff in my story. And she gravitated on like the worst part, and two, the shortest part. And then we explained to him that she was a mother, she had a son at the time, and that she immediately put herself in that situation. So for her, that part of his story is what resonated with her immediately. And that was one of the reasons why we started to kind of create these double-ups, where we would have multiple artists create the same story, but have multiple artists make an image off of that one image, so that you could kind of, the vet could kind of see what different people gravitate towards. And it's the whole idea of like, you hear a story and then you listen to a story, so it's kind of like, what are you listening to, and then what are you actually hearing? And for her, she actually heard that 2 minutes of that story that kind of gravitated towards her. So the image that she ended up creating was kind of this like mother at the top that's kind of in pain after reading this letter, and then kind of this kind of, vignette of kind of him typing on a typewriter, that letter that she actually wrote. So this was the first piece that I created for the project. I've done two so far. Me and Lee actually collaborated on another piece of a Navy veteran, but this was the first piece that we did in the original 22. And Bob is a Army Vietnam vet. He went through boot camp. When he got sent to Vietnam, he got sent to Cu Chi, Vietnam, and he started off as a delivery transport driver. His truck had blown up, and he was lucky to survive, kind of thing. Like, it was one of those things where it wasn't catastrophic, but it was to a point where he was kind of like questioning, like, oh, do I want to be here, kind of thing. And a position opened up for a demolition expert. And the only way that happens is if the previous demolition expert actually passes or dies in combat. So he volunteered. He had never worked with explosives, never worked with det cord or anything like that, and he kind of learned on the job. There wasn't anybody there telling him how to do things, so he kind of just figured it out on his own. And the image here depicts kind of him talking about part of his experience where he was proud because one of the longest tunnels that he had blown up was 200 yards long, and he had to use 10 charges in order to blow that up. And he said the interesting thing about it is that you set all the charges as you go back, and you have to kind of time it. So the length of the det cord determines how long it's going to take. So he had to like light part of it, see how long like a section of it takes to burn. So if it's 3 inches takes 10 seconds, he would have to time that and then figure out how long it's taking him to get back, and then how long it's going to take him to get forward, because he has to light it at the end and has to give himself enough time to get out of the tunnel before that first charge goes off. And he kind of viewed himself as a protector of his platoon, because he would go in first before they would set up camp or anything to ensure that all the tunnels were, one, destroyed and that there wasn't anyone in them. He said that he only encountered Vietnamese in the tunnel once, and they kind of scrammed when he jump down into it. And he fired his gun down the tunnel, and he said that was the worst idea of his life because it was just the echo that it caused was one thing. And he said it was another thing that he had mentioned was they were making them faster than he could actually blow them up. So as soon as he would blow one up, they'd find more, and then like they would, as they're packing up camp, they would find one that they thought they missed, but it was just a new tunnel. It was right next to their camp. And it's one of those things where it was just kind of this thing that they didn't understand how they were making these tunnels so fast. I mean, and it was one of those things where it was kind of like a silent killer because they'd wait for everybody to go to sleep, they'd pop up, and they would just decimate the camp, and then they'd go back in and then leave. So it was like you would never even know that they're there. So in this image, I kind of had him kind of coming out of the tunnel, kind of looking up at the sky, kind of proud. I kind of had these explosions happening kind of behind him, and then using kind of the helicopters as kind of like this victory that they've kind of like, done something good. And then kind of this cord here that I've kind of wound in the corner just kind of represents all of that cord, the deck cord that he would actually have to unravel, because that's one of the things he talked about was it's just a spool, and it's kind of like really unwilling wire, where as soon as you start, or if you drop it, it kind of unspools, and then you have to try and figure out how to get it all back, and it's not easy stuff to work with. Again, his story was about 2 hours, and we focused on, it was a good bit of his experience was represented here. And the nice thing about having a bunch of different artists create pieces for this project was we got a lot of different images. So like Kathy's here is more illustrative, right? So it creates a different experience than this. This is more just literal, where you're actually trying to create something that looks more like an experience. This, because the experience was way different, this was about sexual assault that Sherry in the Air Force had experienced in the mid to late 90s. And the artist felt that having an image that people could approach would allow them then to experience a story. Where she didn't want to have this depiction of what actually happened, because she felt that people would just not even approach it or interact with, or engage with the actual image. So she created kind of this carnival-esque imagery where she kind of took this kind of tilt-a-whirl carnival ride, and then she turned all of these bumper cars into airplanes, and then had all the antagonists that were actually bothering her and harassing her, kind of flying around her. And you can see she kind of has clenched fists and like anxiety, and she's kind of standing there. And then she has kind of this little girl she's kind of making eye contact with. So it was one of those things where she was kind of like standing outside of this dream, in a sense, kind of looking in and kind of seeing all of these kids kind of like picking on her. So when you think of like growing up, there's always that like, well, if the boy picks on you, he must mean he likes you kind of thing. So it was kind of that idea of like having all of these boys kind of surrounding this single girl, and kind of her looking back as like this comfort, like, please help. So if this one here is probably 7 or 8 color silk screen. So this takes a screen for every color, and then you layer those colors on top. And then there's time that dry in between, and then the next layer, and then dry in between, the next layer. And this all had to be dried. And Kathy, I know she does a drawing for every layer. So it's not like she's taking an image and then just burning it into the screen. She takes like transparency, and she draws with like Conte crayon on top of that, so you can kind of see that it's hand drawn, and then overlays them, so the drawing kind of builds up with each layer that she draws, and then she kind of flip through the colors and add information and go back and add information, and then once those are all separated, they all become their own screen, and then they end up getting screen printed on top of each other to create all the colors that you see. So it's a labor of love, and the fact that the artists were willing to kind of spend the time to actually create that image based off of that story, I think says a lot about the project itself and how important it is to them. And she's done 2 images, so after she finished this image, we reached back out to her and said, hey, would you like to do another one? And no hesitation, she said, of course. So we've had several artists do multiple interpretations, and it's been kind of great for the project because we get both of those interpretations, but we also know that they're going to treat it with respect. So it's worked out for us in the long run. Having different interpretations and different styles, there's symbolism that we've had where they just use icons to kind of, create the story. So the one right on the right that Neil did is this kind of illustration. It's almost like a logo where, he kind of created this skull and kind of captured kind of one thing that someone had said and kind of made it a motto on the actual logo. So again, having those different approaches creates for a more diverse kind of exhibition, but also shows kind of that artist's specific style. The one thing that we wanted to make sure that we didn't do was kind of tie the artist's hands. So when we actually recruit them, we tell them they can use any printmaking style, they can do any size, they can do black and white or color, it's completely up to them. When we started the project, we figured everybody was going to send us 8x10 black and white woodcuts because they're just easy to do. And we were wrong. No one did anything outside of what they normally do. So Megan had the same story as myself, Bob, the Vietnam Army vet, and she focused on the same part of the story. And the interesting thing is once we started seeing how artists were responding to the stories, we started to have that story illustrated or created an image of by different artists, not the same artist. So since I was male, we wanted to get a female's perspective on that same story. And that happened with 17 other stories. So now we have 18 of these pairs, so we have 36 total images. And we're hoping at some point we can show kind of just those images as an exhibition, just so that you can kind of see and compare and contrast and kind of see the different sides of each story. And with hers, because she gravitated to the same part of the story, again, her approach is completely different. Hers is a lithography. She has cut paper. And it's a multicolor. So mine's black and white, engraving or etching, and this has a completely different feel to it, right? You don't have the chaos going on in the background. She focused on symbolism where she's using this bird as kind of the protector of her young and just kind of flying above everything. And if you get close, it has these tunnels that she's kind of created on the top and the bottom. And along that, you can kind of see the squiggle line, and there's the 10 charges for the 200 yards that she's kind of created throughout it. So it still references everything that I spoke about in my piece, except she's doing it in a much different way. And that's one of the kind of powers of storytelling, right? Is you can tell a story 100 times, and depending on who you're telling it to, someone's gonna pick up something different, and they're gonna create their own mental image based on their own experiences in their head. And we're kind of trying to get that out of that person so that we can create this visual experience for others to kind of enjoy. So one of the interesting things about James Ellers and Lauren's print, Lauren, an Army veteran from Vietnam, was one of the things that we try to embrace is the fact that the artist and the vet don't meet until after the project is done. And the reason that we do that is we don't want them to be influenced by the veteran in any way as far as what they're actually going to create outside of the story. And our main concern is that the artist may actually be like, well, could you send me a photo of yourself in the military, and then just do a portrait of them as kind of an easy way out. So we wanted to make sure that we were forcing the artist, and I know this sounds bad, but forcing them to actually like deal with the story itself and face some hard challenges. And I think this was one of the examples that we gravitated towards when we actually present kind of the project to colleges and universities as kind of an example of that, because when Lauren entered the project, he was very anxious about what he was saying because he didn't want to tell a story of combat, even though he told us the background of that. The story he wanted the artist to gravitate toward was the homecoming of coming back from Vietnam. And, you know, the horrible reception that they got when they landed in Cleveland from, you know, people calling them baby killers and spitting and throwing things at them. And James, when he heard the story, he had reached out to me after he started sketching the sketches for this actual print and was like, I don't know if this is what I should be doing. And I was like, that's good. Like, that's the whole point of the project, is to kind of confront you with an uncomfortableness because it may not be something that you've experienced, but we also want James to understand that Lauren is giving you information and we want you to respond to what you connect with most. And so he ended up talking to a veteran buddy of his, and his friend kind of reassured him that he was on the right path. Like, if that's what you feel the story should be about, then go with it. And I remember when they dropped this piece off to Lauren, I believe I want to say that they recorded it. I wasn't there. And I remember, like, we had everything, like the frame shop that we got at Frame Dad had it in butcher paper. And he was like hesitant to open it because he was a little bit like, whew. And then he opened it, and then the first thing he said was he got it, which was kind of reassuring. And it was one of those things where after everything happened, we ended up connecting the both of them, and we ended up having a Zoom interview where, we kind of connected them, and my colleague was asking questions. I'm like, how did you feel? And like when you open, and they kind of got to talk to each other, and they've done it on, I think, 3 occasions now where we've kind of connected them to kind of talk and just share experiences after the project, during the project, so that we can kind of get more insight on kind of what goes into the project itself beyond just the final show. And I think that their story is true of the majority of the pieces that are in an exhibition, because as being one of the artists that participated, there's something there that, there's an uneasiness because you want to make sure that you're doing their story justice, that you kind of start second guessing yourself as an artist, as, am I doing the right thing? Am I overstepping bounds? Is this really what they want? And to the end, at the end of the day, everything has kind of worked out for a reason. And I think the veteran is not only appreciative, but they also have something that they can then share with their family. And a lot of our younger vets have kind of taken ownership of that piece as almost like a badge of honor. They've sent us pictures of it hanging in their living room, their dining room, above their kitchen table, and they use it as a conversation starter. Like where people are like, where did you get that piece? That's awesome. And I'm like, oh, that's a piece of that an artist did based on my military experience. And it's one of those things that then gets them open to actually share that story with other people that they may never talk to about. So the nice thing is that we have a collection that we can share with people, and the artists are appreciative of everything that we've given them, and that we're appreciative of everything that they've given us. So yeah.